And now live on the Facebook. Still creating some problem with the Facebook. Anyway, I'll connect it. They're coming. The PPT you start with, and by the time I'll connect you to the Facebook. Please unmute yourself, Preeti ji. Yeah.
All okay?
Yeah, all okay, except I'm trying to get it to the Facebook. There's, again, it's creating some problem.
No, if it doesn't, it's fine. We'll just carry on.
Yeah, you started. I'll try.
Ji. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the much awaited poetry session. I know this is something I've been looking forward to tremendously. And it's not only because I have known Sudeep Sen for many, many years, but also because in the past, I've been fortunate enough to listen to him, to Anamika, and of course, Malashri, on a number of occasions. So I know that a feast of the sense of words, of emotions, of feelings, of color and sound await us this evening. As Dylan famously said, the world is never the same once a good poem has been added to it. And today I know we're going to have lots of good poetry. Sudeep Sen is a well-known poet who writes in English. His prize-winning books include Postmarked India, Rain, Aria,
I think, yeah, please.
Atlas. And he's the first who's been honored to deliver the Derek Walcott Lecture and read at the Nobel Laureates Festival. Anamika, who we have here with us today, is Associate Professor at the Department of English in the University of Delhi. She's a poet, a novelist, and a translator, with 8 collections of poetry, 5 novels, and 4 works of criticism to her credit. She's won several awards, including the Bharat Bhushan Award for Poetry, the Girja Mathur Samman, Sahityakar Samman, Parampara Samman, Kedar Samman, etc. Her poetry is prescribed reading at a number of national universities, and her poems and essays have been translated into a number of languages. She is a trained Kathak dancer as well and has a PhD in Hindi literature also. Recently retired from her academic and administrative position. She used to be in the English department there. She is a member of the English Advisory Board of the Sahitya Academy and the Bharatiya Jnanpeeth's Advisory Committee as well. Her books include In Search of Sita, Revisiting Mythology, Tagore and the Feminine, and Finding Radha. Malashri is a senior consultant to the Ministry of Culture and is on a number of international book award juries as well. I'd like to specially welcome all three of you to Majha House. It's of course online right now, but I do hope that we'll be able to welcome you to the physical space that we have in Amritsar very, very soon, or at least as soon as COVID allows us to. I would now ask Arvinderji to please first screen the film, and after that we'll hand over to Malashri to take the conversation forward with the two poets that we have with us this evening.
All set.
Good evening, everyone. That was an auspicious beginning. The poem Prayer Flag by Sudeep Sen danced to the words. There is Shobna Narayan, who put in a beautiful aesthetic performance. Anamika, you've translated this poem, so I hope at some point you will read out a few lines from there. But I do want to compliment Sudeep and Anamika for opening up the very exciting possibility of famous poets collaborating in a very creative manner. We've called this session Jugalbandi because Jugalbandi means you really have to talmel karke, you've got to get on with each other, and not always is it a well-rehearsed kind of a situation. You often have to match each other's moods. So the idea of Jugalbandi is really beautiful, and especially with English and Hindi, the languages that you work with, the possibilities are enormous. So yours is a very creative response, not technical translation, which is what many translators of literary texts have to confront. So what is your interpretation of literary Jugalbandi? Anamika, you first, and would you give us a few lines of your translation of the Prayer Flag poem?
Right. Should I begin with the translation or should I comment first? What do you do?
Begin with the translation.
Okay. अस्त व्यस्त लहराती तेज हवाओं में आहिस्ता खुलती है प्रार्थना पताका प्रथम रश्मिका सजग अभिनंदन लेकिन आज की सुबह नहीं चमकीली चिंता तुझ श्लथ और गाढ़ी रुपहली कुछ वैसी झील की चकाचक सतह होती है जैसी कोई नहीं है यहाँ एक औरत के सिवा दूर कहीं देखती है जो एक अनंत लिनन की गंभीर पावनता में लिपटी यह उसकी साड़ी प्रार्थना पताका सी पर उसका रंग नहीं कोई व्याकुल नहीं वह नहीं कर रही है विलाप देख रही है टकटकी बांधे पानी का ढुलमुल चमकीलापन आकाश का भीगा भारीपन जब तक की चट्टानी रेखा से मिलता है खुल मिल जाते हैं उनके किनारे झील के कहीं भीतर मैं उसके पीछे खड़ा था निहारता वे सारे दृश्य बंद जो उसकी दृष्टि में थे. Actually, the whole process of intertextual dialogue that you were referring to, Maladi, reminds me of a very strange scene in Norway, in a Norwegian village. It's very ironical that I, for the first time, saw a Buddhist, Heinyan Buddhist, a monk, breaking his mandala. Every day, there was a Lillehammer festival, and we were a part of it. And they were also called that in JLF also, they had called some Buddhist nuns at some point of time, and they were invited. And every morning I saw them preparing a mandala. That's a kind of structure supposed to be drawing positive forces from the universe. And they broke it every other day. By the evening, they broke it. They did whatever ritual they had to. Somehow, this whole, and I asked them, why do you do this? And they said, we do it so that we do not get attached to it. So whatever mandala we prepared, I got my first lesson into sublimity, there. I thought, for me, translation is an act of, it's a kind of spiritual training where you break your ego. The way those Buddhists were breaking their mandalas. And you extend your ego barrier till it reaches the infinity. The whole spectacle is
Anamika,
yeah.
So sorry. So your lesson is that when you translate, you have to break through that ego and
Yes.
extend the language of the other person. Sudeep, what's your take on that?
So good evening, everyone. I have to sort of say that the video was sticking a little bit. I think it's the broadband or bandwidth issue, so apologies for that. The film is directed by Aparna Sanya, who's done a beautiful job putting it all together. And this film, this is actually just a sequence of Shobna Narayan's stage production called Shunyata. So in the live version, there were about 50 monks chanting Om Mani Padme Hum. So you can imagine the sort of resonance that it created. But back to translation, for me, translation is simply an act of love. It's an act of transference. It's most of the time, unless of course it's commissioned, I've translated work purely because I've enjoyed them so much that I want that piece of text travel to other language groups so that they can enjoy it equally. There are various ways of translating, of course, and I have a very scientific way of doing things, which I can talk about at some point later. But to preface the whole thing, I would say that it's very important for a translator, and that's my view. It's very important for a translator not to override the original poet or the poem. Sometimes I find the translations are stronger than the original poem. And that could be problematic. It's my way of giving reverence to the original source, the source text, which is the poem itself. If I can get to about 99% of what the poem is like in its translated version, I'm happy. But if the translator's voice becomes more powerful than the original poem, then problems can happen. And it happens, sometimes you can see a film version of a novel is better than the novel itself, and this sort of thing. But to me, it's an act of reverence. It's an act of love, really.
So in one case, it's an act of breaking through the ego. In another case, it's an act of love. That's beautifully put. Anamika, in your introduction to the translations you've done of Sudeep's poems, you've actually talked about the love that there is in the meeting of Radha and Krishna and that beautiful scene of Ras Leela where they exchange garments with one another. He dresses in a lehenga choli, she dresses in Krishna's clothes.
That's right.
Krishna, instead of feeling miffed about this, actually says, give me shringar, give me garlands, give me jewelry.
Right.
So you quoted Amir Khusro in your introduction, those famous lines, Chhap tilak sab chini re, mose naina milaike. So is translation, according to you, a surrender or an act of negotiation? How do you relate it to this Radha imagery? It seems to me it's sort of surrender to the moment.
Right. It's a good blend of both, the whole idea is a good-natured adjustment. Neither will I there is a Hindi, bhakti saying, "Na main dekhun aur ko, na tohe dekhan deun." I mean, parallel to this and opposite to this, I could say, neither will I boss over, nor will I let you boss over. I mean, this is it. It's a good-natured adjustment. You know how, you have to adjust to the surrender first, begin by surrender, and then playfully you could, take a few flings here and there. It's a kind of preeti kala, as they put it in Hindi. It's a friendly kind of play. It's a play field after all. So some kind of, but this should not be with the view to dominate. The same, any kind of gender relationship between two classes, two castes, two genders also, this kind of an equation is, I think, very handy. And between two civilizations looking into each other's eyes, it's a chapti like naina milai ke, when we translate two civilizations and through languages look into each other's eyes, falling in love, paying tribute. And the whole idea of hegemony has to be dealt with. It should not be with the view to dominate. It should be a very playful exchange. This is what I thought.
Nicely
and,
put.
This is, thank you.
Sudeep, what about you? Is it
So I would
surrender
actually
or is it negotiation?
I think it's negotiation. See, first you have to fall in love with the text. I mean, if you don't fall in love with the text and surrender yourself completely, there is no way that you can actually take this forward, because at some point you will get bored and sort of, leave. I think what Anamika said about relationship is quite apt, because it is, after all, adjustment. Any successful relationship is a sort of adjustment. So negotiation is a very, very important thing. Think of it as a music mixing board. You have all these 1,000 knobs, and you sort of put the bass up and the treble up and the mid-range up. And so you essentially form a kind of arc which is palatable both to the tongue as well as to the ear. You create a sort of balance and harmony, and that's what it's all about. Also, I have to add that, this translation process between Anamika and I also maps our growing up. We were very young when we started out. We were just one book old. We were in our, early 20s when we started out. We completely mad. She was very young. I don't know whether I was even married then. She was. So we've been through marriage, birth of children growing up, and now we are admiring each other's gray hair. It's a wonderful process of growing up. It's a jugalbandi of a larger kind, where, in fact, I can, depending on what poem I'm reading of Anamika's and vice versa, I think, I can actually map which part of her life she is at. Because
so let's get a poem, Sudeep and Anamika. It would be lovely to have your poetry and translation. So you illustrate the point that you're each making, somewhat different points of view on what the act of translation means. Sudeep, I can think of your twin poems, Flying Home and A Blank Letter, which are a paired set of poems. Do you have them handy? Do you think you can read them out?
Yes. So I'll read both these poems. They're fairly short poems. Flying Home, the first one, and Blank Letter. And these were actually also done very early on. So I'm glad you picked these, because this was the early part of the trajectory, and how the translation, also the kind of translation also changed. So this is very early work. Also, the poem is an old poem. Flying Home. I meticulously stitch time through the embroidered sky, through its unpredictable lumps and hollows. I'm going home once again from another home, escaping the weave of reality into another one that gently reminds and stalls to confirm my body is the stepson of my soul. But what talk of soul and skin in this day and age, such ephemeral things that cross-weave blood and breath into clotted zones of true escape? What talk of flight time and flying when real flights of fancy are crying to stay buoyant unpredictably in mid-air amid pain, peace, and belief? Just like thin air sketches where another home is built in free space vacuum, as another patchwork quilt is quietly wrapped around, gently in memoriam.
Lovely.
A companion poem, which is sort of partly modeled, but Milton's La Allegro and El Penseroso, the two poems. They are sort of, these two poems are structured similarly. And in a way, it's good because we're talking about bipolarity, duality, Jugalbandi. So this is the other side, the Radha and the Krishna side of the story. A blank letter. An envelope arrives unannounced from overseas containing stark white sheets, perfect in their presentation of absence. Only a bold logo on top reveals its origin, but absolutely nothing else. I examine the sheets, peer through their grains, heavy cotton-laid striations, concealing text in white ink, postmarked India. Even the watermark's translucence makes the strip's invisibility transparent. Buried among the involute contours lie sheets of sophisticated pulp, paper containing scattered metaphors, uncoded, unadorned, untouched, virgin lines that still populate and circulate to keep alive its breathings. Corpuscles of a very different kind. Hieroglyphics, unsolved, but crystal clear.
Very lovely, Sudeep. The Flying Home poem is a favorite with several people because I think it also reflects your autobiographical experiences of multiple homes and trying to find a location, and that pairs very well with the blank letter poem, which is the mysteriousness of silence and where do hieroglyphics and words come from, if they come at all. So Anamika, these are very intricate ideas and concepts, almost transcending words. So please do give us the Hindi translation of both these poems if you have it with you. Thank you.
उड़ान घर की ओर, बेल बूटेदार आकाश पर करीने से टांकता हूँ समय, अप्रत्याशित ढंग से ऊबड़ खाबड़ उसकी सतह पर। मैं एक बार फिर जा रहा हूँ घर दूसरे, घर से एक यथार्थ की बुनावट छोड़ता दूसरे में, वह जो आहिस्ता से याद दिलाता रोकता है, मेरा शरीर मेरी आत्मा का सौतेला बेटा। लेकिन अब आत्मा की और त्वचा की क्या चर्चा, ऐसे में, ऐसे युग में इतनी नश्वर चीजें, जो रक्त और साऊस की ताना भरनी से बुनता है, थक्का थक्का प्रक्षेत्र सच्चे पलायन के। चर्चा उड़ान के समय की या उड़ान की, जल कल्पना की सच्ची उड़ानें चीख रही हैं कि उपलाती थिरी रहे बीच हवा में, पीड़ा प्रशांति और विश्वास के बीचों बीच, तनवंगी हवा की तरह जो बनाती हैं तस्वीरें, जहां दूसरा घर बनाया जाता है, खाली स्वतंत्र शून्य में, चिप्पी वाली एक दूसरी रजाई जब लपेटी जाती है अपने चारों तरफ धीरे से याद में।
Very nice. Very, very successful indeed. Sudeep, I hope you're happy with that.
I'm internally happy, yes.
Anamika, do you have a blank letter also available?
Right.
Please.
एक कोरी चिट्ठी अप्रत्याशित आता है एक लिफाफा विदेश से झक सफेद लिए पन्ने सटीक अपनी प्रस्तुति में अनुपस्थिति की शीर्ष पर सिर्फ एक शिरस्त्राण चिन्हित देता पता उसके उद्गम का और कुछ नहीं मैंने परखे इसके पन्ने उसके दानेदार कागज से झांकती स्थूल सी कपास धारियां छुपाती हुई पाठ सफेद स्याही में डाक मुहर भारत जल लकीर भी पारभासक पारदर्शी करती अदृश्यता लिपि पन्ने पड़े थे घूर्णावर्त सी लहरियों में शालीन लुगदी पर पन्नों पर छितराए रूपक खुले हुए निरावरण अनछुई अनब्याही पंक्तियां उफनती जनती वितरती सांसें कायम रखती रक्त वाहिनियां कुछ अलग तरह की अनसुलझे शिलापट मणिभ प्रांजल.
Very nice indeed. I'm going to ask you one or two questions, Anamika, on translation and the challenges. See, Sudeep is known for many kinds of capabilities, but certainly very well known for his meticulous craftsmanship and prosody and the rhyme and the meter. Your poetry in Hindi is very well known for the nuances of emotion. Now, when you translated the craftsmanship of Sudeep's poems, how did you manage to find the equivalent and the balance between meter on one hand and the musicality on the other and the language text of Hindi to be put into these new forms?
Right. You know, randomness and syncopation, you know, these are two technical terms of music, which postmodernism, even modernism introduced. And there's a law of compensation, you know, like the seeds of karma, they say, they sprout, you know, when will they sprout, you don't know. Similarly, music that you've lost somewhere, you can put it back at some other place. I mean, there is a method in that madness, you know, I must say. There is the music of meaning is one good thing. And the other thing is that whatever you lose at one place, because it varies from one language to another. How, you know, even the sentence structures. I had sometimes, you know, we had a little argument also. He was very particular about the look of the poem. Structurally, he said, Anamika, my poems should be in the real order. I mean, in the same kind of sentence structure. I mean, syntactically, they should be same. I mean, in SOV and SVO languages, this won't match. And in Hindi has a music of its own, and English is a tight-lipped language, but he has created music of meaning here. I mean, he has been very good at it. You know, he has created, you know, he's taken a pause, and then he has added music to it. So I was not, as you said in the very beginning, we're not technically, I mean, it was not word to word, but, you know, whatever I lost in one place, I put at another place. I mean, the pound of flesh that I lost here, I put at, you know, I put it somewhere else. So this is one technique. And sometimes I had to alter the structure also. But you know, the music, somehow I have retained, and I've also made drafts. And, but the Chanda Shastra in Hindi, that is not like iambic or pentameter or the trochaic pentameter. Here we have other kinds of rhyme schemes. And I have, you know, I have those reverberations ringing in my head. So I'm loyal to the kind, because what I had in my mind are the Hindi readers. I mean, as such, you know, his poems are rooted in like Picasso's painting. He you know, have a very, you come across an aporia every now and then. I mean, there's for the 65 people.
Anamika, sorry for cutting in, but we have an audience which is waiting to hear your poems and the translation. So perhaps the best thing is to illustrate this very exciting that you're making about compensation.
Like, yeah, there's like Tana Bharni and Thakka Thakka. There was nothing like Thakka Thakka in the original, you know, I'm illustrating from this very. So Thakka Thakka, and there is another poem where, you know, he has in Hiroshima, perhaps.
Hiroshima,
in Hiroshima
poem.
I have made very many, I mean, raised very many equivalents. Like, you know, here he was the way, there was a point where he said, remembering the fallout of that sky. Now, that fallout I had translated at Yaad Karo Ragad Jhagad Akash Ki. Now, Ragad Jhagad has a music and an earthy kind of a music, and it refers to whatever blast, you know, happened up there in Hiroshima. So such you know, things I have introduced then he had said frozen in time with wisdom. So I used Kal Kilit Vivek Vehval. Now, Vivek is something, wisdom is something that is not associated with Vehvalta or movingness, because with the way, when you control your emotion, then only you are considered Viveki. But the kind of disruption that had taken place, and the kind of chaos that was being handled through the musical intervention in this particular poem, I have, you know, caught it like in the Pralayankar Prashant, when, you know, in the context when Shiva has his cosmic dance, and that's the, you know, dance of destruction. There he has used this Keelit kind of a thing. So I have, you know, been playing
we're all getting very curious about the original poem. Sudeep?
I should read the original poem.
Do you have the original poem? I think she's made some excellent points about the difficult issues in that poem and the difficult phrases and the challenge of your craftsmanship. You want exactly the same shape on the page. Please go ahead.
So I have to say that I'm a very, very strict person to work with. I'm very kind and affectionate outside the workspace. But during work, I pretty much have a cane in hand. So I really got on to Anamika's case, because initially a lot of the drafts I was seeing were done in a way that, sure, the Hindi reader would get it in a different kind of way. But I said, why aren't we going to be pushing the Hindi reader? Hindi poetry is of a certain kind, it's got various styles, but since you're translating a certain kind of English poetry written by an Indian, we need to push those tenets in Hindi too. So I was behind her a lot with the whip.
I can imagine.
Anyway, this is the original. Remembering Hiroshima tonight. It is full moon in August. The origami garlands surrounding the park glitter as the stars. Plutonium twinkle. Remember the fallout of that sky. Tonight, everyone walks around the solemn arcades where lovers were once supposed to be. In the distance, the crown of Mount Fuji sits, clear on the icy clouds, frozen in time with wisdom. Suddenly the clouds detonate and all the petals, translucent, wet, coalesce. A blossoming mushroom peeling softly in a huge, slow motion. But that's only a dream. Tonight, real flowers are blooming in the ancient Japanese moonlight.
Very lovely. I can now see the talmel going on in the Jugalbandi, how you were able to pick up some of those difficult visual and images and put them into Hindi. Sudeep, when you translated Anamika's poetry or this book, The Typewriter is My Piano, not all the translations are by you. A substantial number are by Aline Zaidi, and there's another section which has poems by many, translations by many hands. Now, as an editor and a translator, how do you handle this business about different strategies of translation? Yours and Arlene Zaidi's may be quite different. And the poet is the same, Anamika. So what happens when two different styles of translation are used to bring about the change in the original Hindi? Can you give us some quick examples from your work, Arlene's work, and tell us how different impacts happen?
So let me first preface it with the kind of problems and challenges one faced. The reason I actually started doing the poetry was I'm just shocked that it's taken so long. Anamika will be turning what? She's 59, 60. We shouldn't be talking about age, but there we are. You know, our birth certificates are in the public domain. I'm just shocked that there is no Hindi book of selected poems of Anamika. She's such a fine poet. So my impetus was, you know, get this book out there so that, you know, people can read and see what's there. However, she's been widely translated by various hands, and it's all over, you know, scattered over different anthologies, magazines, and so on, done at various points. I found most of the translations that were done before were done hastily. Even though there was love and affection behind the translation, I thought there was a sense of laziness, because I'm very, very meticulous when it comes to language and when it comes to the music of the language and when it comes to grammar, especially. So Arlene Zaid's translations were grammatically flawless. So that was one good thing not to worry about. Many other translations, I found there was grammatical errors which I had to correct. So then I said, you know, how much do I intervene as an editor? So I had to have a light touch. That's why I separated the sections by each translator, so that people can judge for themselves how each translations are and what kind of methodologies they use. Because in the bulk of translators, you know, they transmit the story of the poem correctly. Often the musicality is gone and the nuance of the line breaks and so on is gone, because that takes a lot of time to get through. So in my translations, of course, you know, because I did them, I spent a lot of time doing them. So as an editor, I just wanted to make sure that the errors are ironed out. There's some sort of an overall arching musicality and timeline, chronology sort of, and thematic sort of unity. And then I separated them out and so on. But it's very challenging. Good thing is many of these other translators I'm talking about are not friends of mine. So I was ruthless regardless. If I'd known them myself, then I would have been a bit more diffident perhaps, in a sense. But I just went there. I said, I'm an editor.
Make a request, sir. Can I make a request for an example? Somehow the poem Second Hand comes to my mind. If both of you have it handy, can we have the original and the translation?
Sure, I think the original should be read first because that's the main poem. So maybe you should read Second Hand, Anamika.
Second hand cheezeं.
Anamika, second hand.
Okay. Second hand cheeजें एक विशाल यात्रा है, एक मशाल यात्रा है साझेपन की. सेकेंड हैंड चीजें एक मशाल यात्रा है साझेपन की. साझा स्पेस कहीं धरती पर बचा हुआ है अब भी, इसका आश्वासन है सेकेंड हैंड सारी किताबें और फर्नीचर. सेकेंड हैंड कितनी किताबों के हाशियों पर हरी लाल मजेदार टीपे वे किसको निवेदित हैं कौन कहे. सेकेंड हैंड फर्नीचर अमर कॉलोनी के फुटपाथों पर करते हैं इंतजार दूज के चंद्रमा की शर्मीली सी रोशनी में नहाए हुए। और एक दिन जब अचानक मुस्काता आता है कोई नया जोड़ा, घंटों वह करता है मोल तोल, कान खड़े करके सब सुनते हैं फर्नीचर, फिर और फिर लद कर चले जाते हैं वे नए घर। विस्थापित जोड़ों की पहली गृहस्थी बसाते हैं सबलेट स्पेसों में पूरे विनय से। गहरी स्थित प्रज्ञता से किसी वृद्ध की मृत्युशैया भी बन ही सकती है सुहाग सेज किसी दंपति की। उद्धत नहीं होती सेकेंड हैंड चीजें, बीत चुकी होती है उन पर कुछ पहले भी, पर उसकी दास्तान लेकर वे कभी नहीं बैठती। उनकी सुंदरता का है रहस्य ये ही है उनकी मिष्टी मिष्टी सी मिस्टीक। इस पर ही न्योछावर कहता है उनसे समय, आमी तुम्हाके भालोबाशी।
So we bring Bengali into this Jugalbandi also.
Even Misty.
Mishti, yes.
Mishti. We had a lot of fun doing this actually. It's so Indian and so Delhi in its location. Amar Colony, if people know about second-hand furniture in Amar Colony, how do you translate that culturally? And the fact that the same bed is being used by someone who's died, a new couple comes and habits it, and these histories are changing on the same bed. And initially, because Anamika is a bit more conservative than I am, so I changed something else into marital bed. I had a much more bolder phrase. But he says, Hindi wale mere ko maar doge. Second hand. After this, actually, I will request not.
So, can I?
Yes, go ahead, Mala.
Yeah, I was wondering whether we should move to another point about cultural differences. You know, between Hindi context and English context, there are huge cultural differences. And Anamika, I'm very intrigued by the title of the book, your translation of these poems. You call it Mera Sharir, Meri Atma Ka Sautela Beta. Now, of course, it is in English, the line, and you read it in the earlier poem, my body is the stepson of my soul. But Sautela Beta and stepson have very different cultural connotations. And similarly, when one thinks of body and soul, somehow Sharir and Atma are not quite the same mental equivalent image that comes up. So, what were you trying to convey through this particular title?
Right. So in Indian context, you know, especially in Indian languages, we have two kinds of step, what should I say, step brothers. Even Ram and one model is that Ram and his brothers also are step brothers, but still there is a kind of, they gel well. And Pandavas also are step brothers, still they gel well. And the other idea is generally you are not, you do not gel well and your draggers drawn. So that dichotomy between body and soul, especially this poem, because it is about, he was telling me that he wrote it when he was in a hospital with AIDS patients. So that dichotomy between body and soul, was different there. And now that we in India talk about this tension ending up, the creative tension between body and soul ends when we talk of transcendence in India. But when, in the West, I suppose this kind of transcendence, I don't know, but, they also have their notion of transcendence, why not? But it's slightly different from India. Here, body is in Tantra and yoga and other places also, in Sufism also, I mean, body is the stepping stone to Atma. So the dichotomy finally ends. But there the tension remains, and that creative tension has been very well. I mean, the patchwork that he refers to, the quilt image that is there, it's not a resolution. I mean, it's not the boundaries in the patch are very much live. They don't, I mean, after all, it's something superimposed, that patchwork that they have created. I mean, it's not that thread. There is no Tana Bharni, no wool, you know, they don't cut across. So that's the Indian notion that we believe in body melting into Atma. So, you know, the Saltelapan, the whole alienation, you know, getting dissolved. But there he had to maintain this distance because he was talking about people who were dying because of AIDS and how they built a you know, patchwork quilt or a flag, whatever it was. So the whole idea of the dichotomy existing there till the very end and still celebrating dichotomy, and here in India we resolve it. So that's why, you know, in the body of the texture, when you read the poem, I have tried to do justice to this difference of approach between that dichotomy.
So Sudeep, I assume you're happy with the title, but I'm going to move us all to Amritsar for a moment. Can you hear me? Why I'm saying Amritsar is because here we are located in Punjab, in Majha House, a very beautiful city of Amritsar with a rich, rich cultural and literary legacy. Do either of you have either of you been translated in Punjabi? And if so, I'm curious, is there a poem that somebody can read out in Punjabi for you?
This is somebody had done it for me.
I believe you have a book coming.
If somebody could read it.
Yes.
This is a Punjabi translation.
Sudeep?
Yeah.
Great.
So can you make it close to the screen? Can you make it close to the screen? I can read it out. Yeah, it's Pratiman.
Pratiman, then you have to look. You tell me the page number because
I am unable to.
I think no, इससे पढ़ा नहीं जाएगा. Sudeep,
Okay.
I believe your translations in Punjabi are somewhere in the making. Is there somebody here who has a copy?
Yes, I think Preeti has given it to someone to read, maybe a poem or two. So this is my book in Punjabi, which is going to come out at some point hopefully at the end of the year. It's called Godhuli Lagno, which translates to Cowdust Hour. Again, very specifically, very, very Indian. One of the things I have to say, you know, you asked about the difference between English and Hindi. Why this whole enterprise becomes joyous and at some level easy is because we are both Indian, very, very rooted Indian poets using different languages. Also academically, intellectually, and also socially, we come from similar kinds of spaces. So the subtonality and the references, cultural references are very easy to catch for us. If another person was doing it, probably it would have been much more difficult. I think Anamika's only problem is I'm super strict when it comes to getting
structure.
Yes, so my book is Godhuli Lagna is coming out. It's a wonderful, vibrant new publishing house called Autumn Art. Surjit Pathar has written the introduction, and Neelam Mansingh has written a foreword to the book, and it's co-translated by Professor Akshay Kumar, who was the head of the Department of the English Department, Chandigarh University, and two PhD students who are now teachers there, Parminder Singh and Chawla. So there are three people who translated it, and Akshay put it all together. And it's being done through slow internet speeds, problems with Gurmukhi's font, because they use some font and they can't get colon doesn't exist. So, and I do not want another font to be inserted. I mean, if it's Times Roman, it has to be a Times Roman thing. You can't get another one. So yeah, it's a really good book, hopefully, because I don't understand it at first, but Preeti, there you are. You have the book. You have the manuscript. You have the PDF.
Yeah,
Preeti, is there somebody who can read out in Punjabi?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
We've asked Gurpratap to take a look at it and find the poem. So I hope he's done that. Gurpratap, are you here?
Ji, I'm here. And I have the poem open on my phone. And I have selected a very short poem by Sudeep. Shall I begin? मौसम खादे रद्दी कीते दस्तावेज.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll begin now. I hope my voice is clear.
Yeah.
Is the sound clear?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Okay. मौसम खादे रद्दी कीते दस्तावेज. मौसम खादे रद्दी कीते दस्तावेज. सुनहरी कादे विच पत्तल. So that's an imagery. कि मौसम खादे रद्दी कीते दस्तावेज. सुनहरी कादे विच पत्तल. जाग जांदे मेरे पैरां दे अचानक पलट जान नाल. जाग जांदे मेरे पैरां दे अचानक पलट जान नाल. इस टेढ़े मेढ़े जैविक बगीचे विच. मौसम खादे रद्दी कीते दस्तावेज. सुनहरी घाह दे विच पत्तल. जाग जांदे मेरे पैरां दे अचानक पलट जान नाल. इस टेढ़े मेढ़े जैविक बगीचे विच. घुमदे फिरदे कच्छू कुम्मियां दा रींगणा. घुमदे फिरदे कच्छू कुम्मियां दा रींगणा. उन्हां दियां सिप्पियां चितकबरियां पीले रंगियां. उन्हां दियां सिप्पियां चितकबरियां पीले रंगियां. भालदियां नमी अते ताज़ा फल. भालदियां नमी अते ताज़ा फल. सर्दियां दी लम्मी नींदर लई.
Lovely.
It's lovely.
Very beautiful and very lyrical.
Yeah, you read
Anamika and
Yes,
Sudeep, we are
yes.
coming close to the end of our program.
Right.
So I would suggest that Anamika, please read a poem of your own. Just choose something which has to do with the seasons, etc. So it reflects this lovely Godhubi poem or a poem there. And then we can perhaps end with Sudeep's poem, which has again been put to a film form. And this is the poem called Silence. If that's
Can I request Anamika for a poem? Because this poem was very difficult to translate. So I'm going to just put out all the difficulties out there, how I struggled. Read Snap Button.
Oh,
that's a favorite.
Marvelous.
I'll just get it. Okay, I'll get it. It's not here in this room. I'll get it.
Okay.
Give me 2 minutes.
Now, Snap Button, it is those little in Bengali we say tip botam. The women's blouse at the back used to have those snap buttons. And it was a problematic poem because she, as I said, she's gone away again. So she's conservative. She says, it deals with so many things. Part of it is innocence, clothing. The tailor measures a woman, to make a blouse, which is so intimate at the same time, so distant at the same, and snap buttons are not very secure, So do we go for a hook? And then all the play with hook and eye and hook, and how the eye, the gaze. This is a complicated thing. At the same time, when she reads it, it's really funny because, the onomatopic sounds are really, you'll hear it. And then, of course, I read the Hindi, which was so English, which was so difficult to do.
चुटपुटिया बटन. मेरा भाई मुझे समझा कर कहता था, जानती है पूनम, तारे हैं चुटपुटिया बटन, रात के अंगरखे में टके हुए. मेरी तरफ प्रेस बटन को चुटपुटिया बटन कहा जाता था, क्योंकि चुट से केवल एक बार पुट बजकर एक दूसरे में समा जाते थे. वे तभी तक होते थे काम के जब तक उनका साथी चारों खूंटों से बराबर उनके बिल्कुल सामने रहे टका हुआ. ऊंच नीच के दर्शन में उनका कोई विश्वास नहीं था. बराबरी के वे कायल थे, फंसते थे न फंसाते थे, चुपचाप सट जाते थे. मेरी तरफ प्रेस बटन को चुटपुटिया बटन कहा जाता था, लेकिन मेरी तरफ से के लोग खुद भी थे चुटपुटिया बटन की तरह चुट से पुट बजकर सट जाने वाले. इस शहर में लेकिन चुटपुटिया नजर ही नहीं आते। सतपुतिया झिगुनी की तरह यहाँ एक सिरे से गायब हैं चुटपुटिया जन और बटन। ब्लाउज में भी दर्जी देते हैं टांक, यहाँ हुक ही हुक। हर हुक के आगे विराजमान होता है फंदा। फंदे में फंसे हुए आपस में कितना सटेंगे, कितना भी कीजिए जतन, चुट से पुट नहीं ही बजेंगे।
Delightful. I can see the humor and also the difficulty in translation. So we're coming on to the end of our session. There is another film with which we will end this. This is a poem called Silence by Sudeep. And after that, we'll take the questions. So over to the administrator. Thank you very much, Sudeep. That was beautiful. Thank you, Anamika. Enjoyed your poetry and the discussion. I'll hand over to the administrator who will take the questions from the audience and then we get on with the discussion. So wonderful audience. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maladiso. Thank you so much. You've always been a great, what to say, you connect.
So, Gurpratap, would you be taking the questions?
Gigi, I'll be doing that. I'll be doing
Okay, all right.
Before I begin with the questions, I would like to tell all of you, all three of you, that was absolutely wonderful to hear all of you talk about this creative process of writing and translating. An absolute delight. An absolute delight. And Sudeep ji, I am honored that I got the opportunity to read one of your poems.
My pleasure. My pleasure indeed.
Yeah. And the first question came quite early in the day by Dr. Gurupdev Singh. And I'll be reading that question out. And he says that you're talking of a very nebulous area in translation. Can a translator really escape not taking freedom and not leaving his mark on the poem? His or her compulsion may stem from the language itself and its interpretation.
So I partly answered this question before I saw the question actually scrolling up and then the stream of other questions that came along. Of course, if you're a good translator, you have to be a good poet to translate well. If you have to be a good poet to translate poetry. There's no question. Best poetry translations are done collaboratively. So which is why, Mala is a great flag bearer and cheerleader for Anamika and me, that, finally two Indian poets from across languages without ego have got together and are doing this. And more should be done, really. Of course, you leave a mark on the poem as a translator, but the mark should be translucent or almost transparent. Then I think it makes for a worthy translation, because if I then become a dominant thing, then I overshadow the original poet, which is fine if the poem is not very good. Sometimes, friends give you poems to translate and you make the poem better if it's not very good, and vice versa happens too, But I really feel that, there's that beautiful space of translucence that is important to keep in mind.
Gurpratap, you have muted yourself.
Gee, I have unmuted myself. All right. The next question is from Preeti herself. Preeti ji?
You please unmute yourself, Preeti ji.
Yeah. No, that was absolutely fantastic. And the films, I don't know what would you call them, but they were absolutely stunning. And I remember, I saw them just a couple of days back, and of course on my computer, it was so much nicer, because we always seem to have some technical issues when we are trying to do it on Zoom. They are completely stunning, and a totally new way, because you've actually used so many different, the visual and everything, so it actually comes to you and your senses. It sort of permeates your senses in so many different ways. So it's not just the listening, but it's also seeing and hearing and everything else. So very, very lovely. I had one question, which of course is a question because having been in publishing for years and years and always finding a certain difficulty in picking up anthologies of poetry to publish. And now that I'm on the other side of the table as a literary agent, that is still the problem because you can never ever seem to sell an anthology to a publisher. And I think that difficulty exists especially for younger poets with debut collections. Do you face that? Have you ever faced that? Do you hear about it from others?
So first of all, thank you very much for liking the films. I have to say, Ramanjit Kaur, who made the film Silence, did a marvelous job. She's a theater actress, and this was her first film, in fact, debut venture, and it's part of a triptych. So she chose these 3 poems to be part of the film as a continuous piece, and the triptych then travels into 3 films. I, of course, wanted Kolkata and Chandigarh for obvious reasons, or Punjab and Bengal for obvious reasons. So hopefully the next 2 will be located there. So Ramanjit probably is online here as well. So really kudos to her. I didn't interfere at all because, I've made 8, 9 films myself and I have a very, very strong aesthetic sense. So if I got into the act of telling her what to do, I would have intruded a lot. The only thing she forced me to do, which I wasn't prepared for, was she got me on screen. I said, you can use my voice, because she had the whole crew and everything there. But somehow, women tend to be very persuasive. So she basically got me on the film, which I didn't want to be, but she's done a wonderful job. Poetry publishing. It is very difficult, of course. But it's like anything else is difficult. I think the problem doesn't lie with the poetry or the poets themselves. The problem lies with, unfortunately, Preeti, people like yourselves who think, not you. Now you're a Y media and you like poetry. And I know so many editors in publishing who like poetry. But somehow publishers tend to give out this spurious message, and I think it's a spurious message, that poetry doesn't sell. It's not true. A first novel bombs, it doesn't sell. A reasonably successful first novel also doesn't sell more than 800,000-900,000 copies. So what are we really talking about? In any case, in most publishing houses across the world, the poetry list is a prestige list. It's supported by cookbooks, by biographies, by books on anxiety, books on slimming, books on wellness. Poetry always has to have patrons. Even in the Mughal courts, they had to have patrons. But it is the highest form of art. And if publishers do not maintain a poetry list, which in the West they do, because it's an honor for them to have poets on the list, it really reflects badly on publishers, I think. I mean, I've been lucky to have good publishers publishing my poetry, but it's just sheer luck. And now that I've done it a lot for a long time, you establish yourself, it's a very different thing. But for beginners, it's very difficult. Even not just beginners, I mean, even for people like Jayant Mahapatra. I was trying to sell Jayant Mahapatra's collected poems to Penguin, actually, for Penguin Classics. And they didn't take it on because they said, I don't think we'll sell enough. It's not about selling, it's also about archiving literature. So
I think we need to bring, the situation in Hindi may be different. I'm really happy to hear Anamika's viewpoint. And I also want to tell the audience here that Anamika, in her quiet way, does a lot of things in the service of poetry.
And
Anamika, if I'm
that
not
also exists a lot now, especially for poetry.
About Pashyanti and your attempt to get young poets out there, young writers together. So is the publishing scene any better in Hindi, do you think?
Yeah, Hindi operates like a joint family because somehow we have 3 generation, 4 generation working together in the same language. So people have taken, we have different, we keep having readings. So, because we keep hearing all kinds of new voices. Sometimes one of us, when, they ask us to write blurbs for them. Then if the person is, of course, I mean, outstanding, and it has, you know, that person has some idiomatic vigor, and thematically also he's picked up things, then we write extensive prefaces. All the senior people do that. And then we are the one, we also have prizes for first manuscripts. And then because we know the publishers, we become agents ourselves. And the publisher who's published my work, if I'm recommending that somebody's work to him, he'll definitely consider. Then we have joint anthologies. We sometimes also polish on the first, you know, polish the first anthologies. So it's, you know, this has been, because collaboration is the only way out. In the beginning, if 5 people, suppose I located 5 people, you know, over a period of 2 years, I located 5 young voices, then I generally recommend a joint collection. And, you know, we are the ones. In Hindi, we do not have any kind like anybody like a literary agent. We writers, senior writers are the literary agent. We are the ones who approach the, you know, publisher. And because he's got to publish our text and he's interested in publishing our text, so he doesn't say no. If we recommend somebody, then, you know, he say, you know, the person has to say yes. And we operate through pressure groups also. We have very many people who, I mean, all the seniors, I mean, we become some kind of a pressure group. So it's a kind of give and take. If they want our manuscripts, we want them to publish younger people. And younger people keep sending from villages, from small towns. They keep sending first manuscripts, not only to Sahitya Akademi. Now it is happening in Sahitya Akademi, but Jnanapeeth had done it, you know, much, you know, almost 20 years ago. And we discovered so many you know, young poets who are now doing well. They're doing excessively well. They're running blog magazines, and they also, it's a kind of torch march actually, because we people were operated like a joint family, the seniors. So they are also trying to encourage others, senior, you know, younger people to them, because empowerment is a mystical process. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get some more questions in if there are
Right.
any. Over
Right.
to you.
Right.
The administrator. Yes, please.
Yeah.
I don't see any more questions in the chat box, but I have a question myself. Since all of you are writing yourself also and translating also, I wanted to ask which one do you find more creatively fulfilling, and which process do you find more creatively challenging?
So they are 2 different sides of the same brain for me. Of course, I'm interested in my own writing first, because that's what I like doing. But because I love poetry, my love for poetry spills into other languages. And because of the fact that I speak Bangla and Hindi, and understand quite a lot of Urdu, and I read Urdu through Devnagari. I've translated the Kafi Azmi book as well. It spills into the other language zones. I have to say, this is an admission over time, that I'm a better poet in English because I can translate from these different languages, because I can get the nuances and music of all the languages, which I in fact bring into my English poetry and hopefully make my English poetry richer. But there are really 2 sides of the brain. Sometimes when my creative juices are not working, I translate other people's poetry. If that part of my brain is not working, I'm reading other people's book of poetry. So, you know, you just have to do riyaz every day. It's like classical music. So I sit down with poetry for 2 hours every day, regardless. And it's not as though I can write a new poem every day. Of course, it'll be wonderful. If not, I'm translating or reviewing other people's book, or just simply reading. But you have to keep the machinery well oiled constantly. Yeah.
Thank you. And Anamika, your take on this?
You know, whenever I feel very lonely, you know, and I want to enter into a dialogue with the older poets, I translate them, or fellow poets. You know, that's my way of reaching out to them and their hours of loneliness. And when my linguistic bones are tired, I derive electricity from them. That's also there. But basically, when at the loneliest hour, I translate. At my loneliest hour, because there I have company. I meet somebody like Utpatsate mamatu kopi samana dharma kalo hi niravadi viplacha prithvi. I mean, the way Bhavabhuti keeps it. Someday, somewhere, I'll get my soulmate. That quest also is on. You want to, reach out to somebody somewhere whose wives may match with you. So this is a very, spiritual quest for me. So I do that.
Also, I want to just address the publishing question a little bit, because in the English language, there are other forces at play. I completely agree with Anamika where, there's a lot of hand-holding and mentorship. In English, the younger generation, I find particularly extremely ambitious, and they will do what they want to sort of get ahead. And there's also the other idea, I think it's a delusion of grandeur, the other idea that because English language publishing also has multinationals, they would rate the multinational publishers higher than the local publishers. Whereas that's not the case in Bangla and Hindi. Because when you come to the local publishers in India, we have a lot of small presses which publish English language poetry, which is where most younger poets publish poetry to start off with. They are the ones who are supporting poetry, and an odd one sort of breaks through and gets into the English language. But everybody wants the Penguins and the HarperCollins of the world, and that's where the problem is, because even in the West, unless you're very, very lucky, you start your apprenticeship with small presses. You win awards, you publish with small presses, and only by the time you're on the 5th or 6th book that you get a big publisher. Vikram Seth's 5th book was finally published by a big publisher. It was, he started off with Writer's Workshop, and his first few books of poetry was published by Carcanet and so on. Faber came much later on the back of, a novel in verse, so to speak. So I think in India, young English language poets are overly eager to get there. And they are so smart. You see, they are bright, smart things. So they have access to the internet. They are very technologically savvy. So, they'll write a poem at night because their heart is broken or they are angst-ridden. It's published at 1 o'clock in the morning. By the morning, they have 5 likes. And the 6th like is from Uzbekistan. And they all call themselves internationally acclaimed. It takes a long time, for a poem to gestate and so on. So there's a problem with social media, self-perception. It's a larger malaise, really. But
I'm going to come in here because we are running out of time. Anamika, what's your next project?
My project, I've started writing a novel on the later years of Sita. After she's raised her 2 sons, she's having a gala time in the jungle, talking to all the Adivasi children, teaching them. And, she's not shown unhappy at all. She's an eco-feminist, Sita, and, discussing things with Rishikas and Rishi and Adi. She's also teaching children how orphaned Rakshas shishus, as she calls them, and talking to the flora and the fauna, and writing letters to her 2 babes, 2 young growing up sons, writing all kinds of things, and they also write back. So this is a happier Sita Vanaprast. She's enjoying her Vanaprast. This is something. And the Pashyanti is, again, you are on the advisory board, you know it all very well. We've built up a platform where all the women writers and the younger men, they're going to, and the sister art forms, they are all going to have a Sufiana dance together, holding hands and dancing together. We are, at the moment, we'll have the online journal, but soon we'll have all kinds of, with Maladi on board and other people on board, Sudeep on the board, we'll welcome translations, critical theory, application of critical theory, and poetry and everything, that coming into Hindi and English. Is a bilingual journal. I definitely want people like the institutions like Majha to join hand, because you've already been working in the collaborative art form, and you believe in the sisterhood of art form. So we also actually want to reach out. Maladi, extend them an invitation, and we can all start together. So,
Well, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
wonderful work.
Thank
So
you.
we'll end with my request to Sudeep to read his new poem, Language, because that is about the Jugalbandi of languages and would be the right note on which to end this session. And I won't speak after that. So I want to thank Preeti, I want to thank Majha House and this wonderful, wonderful audience that has come together to talk about translation and to listen to Sudeep and Anamika, two of our brightest poets in the world today. So over to you, Sudeep, for the last words of this session and your poem, Language.
So I also want to extend my gratitude to Preeti and the Majha House team. I was with them entire 2 hours trying to get these films going, and they tried their best to get the bandwidth going. But we are fighting against Airtel or whatever idea, Vodafone, so it didn't quite happen. And but thank you, the team is fantastic, and look at the number of people who are still there. It's amazing to have this kind of captive audience. So thank you all for your questions. And this is a brand new poem called Language. It's being premiered, so to speak, right now. And it was prompted actually by another session called the multilingual typewriter. And the idea of a multilingual typewriter got me going. How can a typewriter, which is an analog object, be multilingual? It's not possible. So Language, and it opens with Italo Calvino's quote, and I quote, "Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally." My typewriter is multilingual, its keys mysteriously calibrating my bipolar forked tongue. Black-red silk ribbon spools unwind as the carriage moves right to left. In cursive hand, I write from left to right. My tongue was born promiscuous, speaking in many languages. My heart spoke another, my head yet another. Translation seamless. Auricles, ventricles pump blood. Corpuscle-like alphabets, phrases, syntax cross-fertilize my text, breathing life. Texture enriched, music, cadence, spatially enhanced, osmotic, polyglottal, a polygamy of grammar. Letter forms dance, ligatures pirouette, ascenders, descenders, pitch perfect. Imagination isn't caged in speech. Speech cannot be caged in language.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So it was indeed a wonderful session to have all of the three legendary souls amongst us, and thanks to Preeti ji for bringing so much of enlightenment. It was indeed a wonderful session, and being a technical host, I think probably I enjoyed the most. And let me share with all of you and with the audience and the participants that Majha House has started another offshoot, Sanja Punjab, in the month of June. And since June, we are doing very extensive work for the promotion of art, culture, heritage. And in that context, we'll be having tomorrow another session under the banner Sanja Punjab, where Dr. Alka Pandey would be talking to Humaira Alam, and the session would be moderated by Preeti Gill. The timings would be 5:20 p.m. Pakistan and 5:50 p.m. Indian time. That is 20th of September, tomorrow. And I would request all of you, and especially Anamika ji, Mara ji, and Sudeep, I would request all of you and all the participants who are connected with us today in this wonderful session of Jugalbandi to please join tomorrow's session, and let's be the messiah and the messengers of love and harmony, and we have so much in common. We have we have everything in common: the language, the literature, the heritage, the archaeology, the geography, everything. The food, the culture, and of course, we all fall in this Bare Sagir's Punjab, and this beautiful name of Sanja Punjab. Uh, it's going to bring. I am very sure it's going to bring a good amount of peace and harmony in this subcontinent. So with this, I would request everybody, please join us tomorrow. And once again, thank you so very much, Malaji, Anamika, Sudeep, and would request once we are open from free from the COVID and the Corona, I would request please make a visit to Amritsar and be a part of our family. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you
Get
so
well
much.
soon.
Yeah, thank you so very much. I'm
Thank you
unfortunately
very much.
no. Thank you so very much with your prayers and blessings. I'm doing good and I'll be okay. Thank you. And with this note, it's 7:32 and we have still 25 participants and this time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you very much to our guests this evening.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Thank you, Preeti.
Thank you.
God.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.